Good morning, River City. My name is Brad, and I'm one of the pastors here. I am so excited this week to jump into the book of Ruth for the next 4 weeks here at River City. This is one of my favorite books to preach from. I've gotten to preach through Ruth a couple times because it's such a beautiful story. And it really is written as a story for us. I think you probably have noticed already a theme from this early first chapter, which is this idea of feeling like empty and alone. It's probably like a 2-year cycle or so, because I don't have a job that like causes me to travel a lot. Certainly not a job where I have to travel all by myself very often. But every time I do, maybe part of it is that my wife Sarah and I, we don't watch a lot of TV shows without each other. And so like, if I'm gone, I have to like find out a new thing to watch, right? And so sometimes that's like I'll rewatch something on the plane. I don't know about you, but like anything emotional on the plane makes me cry way faster than on the ground. I think that's an altitude thing. I listened to a podcast once, or I'm just a baby up there. I don't know. It's just kind of how it is. But the show that the past couple trips that I have chosen to watch, which is really out of character for me, is this show called Alone, right? Have you ever watched Alone? So Alone is like if Survivor wasn't a gimmick and there were no other people, right? Like, so it's not like you're like trying to play like Chutes and Ladders for a bag of rice in the forest in your bikini with all your friends, like Survivor. It's more like we drop these people off in the absolute middle of nowhere and we see what happens. And whoever doesn't die gets a little money. Which is kind of most of life. That's kind of all of it, right? Like, the longer you live, the more money we give you. Like, that's just kind of how we gauge it, right? What's always astonishing to me is when we get to the end of this show, and there's like 3 to 4 people left. And I'll tell you what's crazy to me is it's not at that point usually what would have taken me out, which is just like anxiety from day one, right? It's not the food poisoning that gets some people or the injuries that get others. It's mostly starvation. They begin to come in these last weeks and they put the people on the scale and they will tell them like, hey, like, we're sorry, like you're not finding enough food for your safety. We have to pull you out of this. And I think what's like so intoxicating about watching these shows, as well as what makes them kind of difficult to watch, are those moments, right? Where you see these people who at this point are so tired and sleep deprived, either cold or hot, depending on the environment. They barely even know how long they've been out there. And they're just all by themselves with nothing to eat. It's just desolate. It's just desolate. Throughout the early chapters of the book of Ruth, this is the land that you are supposed to view and the condition of many people in it. It's desolate. Naomi will refer to herself at the end of this as returning to the land empty, having nothing at all because of her circumstance. And so I just want to ask you that today as we start. Like, when's the last time that you felt empty and alone? Like you had spent all the energy you had to spend. You were exhausted. There was work in front of you to do, and you were empty. You had no idea how you would complete it. This is the setting in which we find the people of God in the book of Ruth, as well as where we will meet Naomi in just a moment. The first verse of this gives us a bit of insight into the setting. Ruth 1:1 says this happens, quote, during the time of the judges. During the time of the judges. I'll read to you from Judges 21:25. This is a good summation of what it was like in the time of Judges. It says this, in those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what seemed right to him. In the book of Judges, we know this thing called the cycle of the judges. This was where the people of Israel would have a big victory. They would draw near to God. Things would be going well. And then a pridefulness would sink in. And this is what would happen. Everyone would do what was right in their own eyes. And slowly the people of Israel in this cycle in the book of Judges would move from a time of plenty to a time of famine, brought on by their own hands, their own sin, as well as God's desire to pull them and point them back to him and his presence. This is where the book of Ruth takes place, is within this time period of the Judges, where cyclically the people of God walked away from God, made gods of other nations, or ignored God altogether, and just did whatever they thought was right until things got bad enough that they returned to the Lord. Now, in Ruth, we have a really interesting piece of literature, book within the Bible. A few things I want to say about it before we jump into it here. First is this. Ruth was a book written for your pleasure, okay? Ruth was a book that was written for your pleasure. It was written like a novel or a story. It's a beautiful piece of literature. Were we to be able to comprehend it in its original Hebrew text. This is a very old story. Judges is one of the earlier periods, just after the foundation, the flood, and as we pull into this early period of Israel's establishment in the land with kings and judges and things like this. This is a story. It's written for your pleasure to enjoy. And so as we hear it each week, because we will listen to a chapter that's in a different translation just so we hear it in a different way, as well as we'll be able to follow along and read at the same time out of the CSP that we use most weeks. As I read to you, as I hope you go home and you're like, I want to read this every day or like every week. I'm going to read through this book for the next 4 weeks. Like, take this in as a story. Now, that doesn't mean I want you to like analyze it, think about it, see how it affects you and changes you, but you got to read it as a book first, okay? It's supposed to delight you, to bring you pleasure, to interest you. Second, this is a story written expressly to communicate an idea for a purpose. God compiled this book, he preserved this story, and he acted into the life of the people in this story so that you would read it and you would see something. That you would see the whole thing and a narrative would be laid before you that would teach you some principles about who God is and what it is like to relate to him in a world where often you can feel alone and empty. So I'm going to pray, and then we will jump into the book of Ruth and work our way through chapter 1. Pray with me, would you? Lord, as we open the book of Ruth today, and as we spend the next 4 weeks in it, God, I pray you would be with us who today feel empty. Feel like they have nothing left for the tasks to which they've been called, and who feel really alone, that there's no one to help them with what's been set in front of them. Lord, in this story, would we find your presence? And God, would nearness to you be enough to both satisfy our need for a companion, as well as to provide everything that we need for the journey that we are on. Lord, in your name we pray. Amen. Ruth 1:1 starts, and we see a journey from a him to a her. Ruth 1:1. So during the time of the Judges, there was a famine in the land. A man left Bethlehem in Judah with his wife and 2 sons to stay in the territory of Moab for a while. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi. The name of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, and they were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They entered the fields of Moab and settled there. Naomi's husband, Elimelech, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. Her sons took Moabite women as their wives. One was named Orpah, and the other was named Ruth. After they lived in Moab about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died. And the woman was left without her 2 children and without her husband. Famine comes to the land of God's people. This famine brought with it, historians would say, a grave foodlessness, loss of crops, as well as the economic implications for a purely agrarian society who depended on the land for their sustenance. Remember, Israel was made up of many shepherds, many farmers, and this was a primarily agrarian time. Famine comes to the land. We are not told in the book of Ruth what kind of famine this was, whether it was drought or locust or something else that came in, but regardless of the fact, it comes and it lasts. There is great humor in the sarcastic sense in this when it says that famine came to the land of Bethlehem, because if you knew the word Bethlehem as a Hebrew, you knew that that meant the house of bread. And so in the house of bread, there was nothing to eat. Not only this we read, but in this land of famine, the choice is made for Elimelech, this husband, this father, to take his family and to leave the land, to flee the land of Bethlehem in Judah, to take his wife, his sons, and go out in to Moab. Now, a few things here with this. God's people were supposed to stay in the land. This is where God had promised that he would provide for them. God tells the people of Israel over and over again, stay with me, stay near me, stay in my covering, and I will protect you and provide for you everything you need. And so it is significant that the first thing that we find out about Elimelech in this book is that his choice, because of a lack of provision, because of a lack of food to eat, was to remove the people from the land which God had expressly said they ought to be in. And so he removes his family from Bethlehem, and they head to the land of Moab, and that is all we find out about Elimelech, because in that land, he swiftly dies. He swiftly dies. Not only does Elimelech die, but in the process of being in the land, we learn that the sons of Elimelech choose to take Moabite women as wives. That's bad. Okay, you should have gasped, right? Moabite women? Awkward. Have you seen how they dress? That one had tattoos. I heard that one. Just a little bit of witchcraft. The Moabite women were women who the Israelites were not supposed to interact with, right? This was a foreign people. Now, lest you believe that there was some sort of like racial purity thing going on here or something to that effect, God's intention for his people is that they would remain a people unified, not by their skin or their origin, though he did form them from a race of people in the Jews, but that they would be identified by who they worshiped and how they worshiped him and him alone. This was not true of the Moabite women. Now, often in Scripture, we see that the downfall of the people of God is when they choose to blend their families and their minds with thoughts other than that of the one true God. Not because those people are uniquely evil. We will see the people of Israel are capable of plenty of wrong, and we know ourselves as followers of Jesus that we are too, but because of the intention and the mooring of their souls. God tells the people of Israel, don't marry into other faiths. He encourages them that they might go out and bring others in to worship the one true God, and then they might be eligible as members of this community, but not to do what was done here. Elimelech dies. We find out that his sons take on these Moabite women, these women of different religion, of different culture. And then we find out that despite the fact that they had fled the land of the famine in Bethlehem to come here to Moab, presuming that they would find more food, not only does Elimelech die, but now both of his sons die. And something important is unsaid here. No children have been born. This means that not only have no children been born, but now there will be no children born. Every avenue for it is over. Naomi has lost her husband in this moment. She has lost her sons. And now she is left with these two daughter-in-laws who have not yet produced an heir to take care of her and the family. But instead, nothingness. No brothers to take over. No food to eat or land to farm in this moment. The gospel has both knit us to God and to each other in covenant. Now, in the Old Testament, there was a clear understanding of the way that that covenant played out in a very spatial and social sense, okay? It was just very clear. The people that you lived amongst were your community. And so you stayed with them and you stayed in it and you worshiped together as a people. This is very different for us in our independent spirits as people who want to believe that our spirituality, that our productivity, and that our emotional stability require no one but us, and what a deficit and an embarrassment it would be if they did. Instead, the Old Testament shows us a covenant that was not a covenant often of just one man or woman and God. It was a covenant of a people and God. So it is significant, the distance from the people of God, and therefore the supposed distance from the presence of God that Naomi feels in this moment. Left without a husband or any sons or any heirs to carry on the family. As verse 5 said, the woman was left without her children and without her husband. Pick it up in verse 6. She and her daughter-in-law set out to return from the territory of Moab because she had heard in Moab that the Lord had paid attention to his people's need by providing them food. She left the place where she'd been living, accompanied by Ruth and I lost my spot with my eyes. Accompanied by her two daughters-in-law and traveled along the road leading back to the land of Judah. Naomi said to them, each of you go back to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you have shown the dead and to me. May the Lord grant each of you rest in the house of a new husband. She kissed them and they wept loudly. And then they said to her, we insist on returning with you to your people. But Naomi replied, return home, my daughters. Why do you want to go with me? Am I able to have more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. Go on, for I am too old to have another husband. And even if I thought there was still hope for me to have a husband tonight and to bear sons, would you be willing to wait for them to grow up? Would you restrain yourselves from remarrying? No, my daughters. My life is much too bitter for you to share, because the Lord's hand has turned against me. Again, they wept loudly, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, and Ruth clung to her. Naomi said, look, your sister-in-law has come back to her people and to her gods. Follow your sister-in-law. Naomi decides that the land of Moab is no place for her to continue, which makes sense. She's lost the family that she came there with. She is here with her two daughters, but they are sitting just hungry and grief-stricken. It seems that the famine that they thought they could outrun by fleeing to the land of Moab, in fact, has not helped them at all. And there is as much famine there and as little for them to go around as there was in the land where they were supposed to be, in Bethlehem. So finding themselves still hungry, finding themselves without any relief from the situation. I love the honesty and the clarity of this story. Don't you glaze it over. What does it say that they did? They make a plan? Did they start to save their money? Did they get over it? No, the text says these three words: they wept loudly. They wept loudly. Hey guys, when you read the Bible, I want you to find truth that changes you in that moment, right? And if you've grown up in the church in particular, if you've grown up in West Michigan or more of a Bible-believing or leaning church, like a church that exposits the Bible, or you sit down and you dig into it, and we do a lot of that here. You have been taught that one of the key things that you're supposed to do when you read the text is to find out what you're supposed to do. What's the purpose? What's the point? Right? This happens to me every week when I write these messages, right? Like I get to the end and I have this section that's labeled in my notes, response. Sometimes I get there, I'm like, uh-oh. Like I should have written the end, right? And you're like, we felt that. We felt that. That's important. Like it is important that you learn truth and then apply truth, because what's the point of knowing things if they don't affect the way you live? But in our culture that emphasizes knowing truth and acting on truth, sometimes we don't encourage you to feel truth that you might be able to act on it. Scripture is a book that is filled with emotions and ought to be read as such. This story is emotional. And if you can't get there, stop stunting yourself towards the reality that leads to the words that will be spoken in this book. It is important that you stop and you read those words. They wept loudly. They wept loudly. Naomi likely thought to herself that she had nothing in front of her. A certain death was what led her in Moab. These women that are with her, they are not assets to Naomi. Like they are being kind here, right? They're in this together. They're sad together. They have nothing together. They're starving together. They're huddled together, weeping. I really wonder at this point, like where they were even living. This was not their land. It's unlikely that they had the means to purchase land there. It's more likely they were there to either beg or just hunker down, where the men could go out and try and provide some for their family, where they could make a new life there in this land. Instead, all they receive, it seems, for their trip to the land is destruction and death. And so they weep. And I want to be clear, I think they probably wept for days. This wasn't like they got a good cry in and then they moved on with action. Like, stop telling yourself that's how things work. Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah likely cried the whole journey back to Jerusalem. Now, the girls both protest when Naomi tells them to just go away, to go and fend for themselves, find someone else to marry. She tells the girls to go away. They both protest at first. They want to stay with her, and she makes this point that if they stay, there's nothing for them. She says, I don't have any more sons. Now, you remember the Old Testament provided for the fact that in this culture, which was egregiously patriarchal, that women, because they needed socioeconomically some sort of support, there was instruction that if your brother's wife was left widowed because of his passing and had no children to carry her on, that you were to marry her, to care for her, to give her children, that she might have a place in this social structure. And so Naomi says, listen, I don't have any more sons for you. And even if I were to go home and get married, are you going to wait for these kids to grow up? And Ruth was like, weird question, no. Right? And it's rhetorical, like, there's no way. There's no way. She insists that they leave. It appears that Orpah takes that advice to leave since she has nothing for them, no real prospects. However, verse 16 tells us that Ruth refused to leave. It says this. But Ruth replied, don't plead with me to abandon you or to return and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. And wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me and do so severely if anything but death separates you and me." And when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped talking to her. This is the most famous set of verses in the book of Ruth because they're beautiful. They read like poetry. Let me read them again. Ruth's words to Naomi. It says, "Don't plead with me to abandon you or to return and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be punished. May the Lord punish me and do so severely, if anything but death separates you and me." In this, we see an extraordinarily loyal and serving spirit come from Ruth. Ruth says to Naomi, "I won't leave you. I'm going to go with you wherever you go. I'm going to go. I'm going to follow you. And whatever God you worship is going to be the God that I worship too." And then she makes the statement that if anything else is going to happen to me, if I ever leave your side, if I don't go with you, if I don't commit to this, if I don't keep your words, might it be a curse unto me. Ruth's choices here provide a lot of contrast to the backstory that we heard leading up to this moment. Whereas before we saw Naomi and her husband and family fleeing the land to which they were supposed to be, now we see them returning and Ruth demanding to return to that land. Ruth's choice presents for us here this contrast to the backstory of a choice not to flee, but to come near to the presence of God. And she makes this claim, and she claims that they're going to go to where God is binding himself to the people, and that she now will bind herself to that same God of Naomi and her family, which is pretty spectacular faith for someone who didn't worship this God, didn't grow up in this place, and who just lost their husband. Like, it's pretty amazing that Ruth speaks out in this way. Pick it up in verse 19. It says, "Then the two of them traveled until they came to Bethlehem. When they entered Bethlehem, the whole town was excited about their arrival, and the local women explained, 'Can this be Naomi?' 'Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara,' she answered. 'For the Almighty has made me very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has opposed me and the Almighty has afflicted me?'" The town was excited, right? This tells me that there was a sense of loss and that they knew what had happened when Naomi and her family left. Perhaps they had heard already in some way of the tragedy that had befallen Naomi and now Ruth. The death of Elimelech, Mahlon, and Chilion spread through the town. Their friends knew. Extended family, if they had any, found out. But the town was excited for Naomi to come. And so they charge out and they call her in and say, "Naomi, Naomi, you've come home," right? They're ready to receive her as a person who's in great pain. Naomi says these words, which I think have been grotesquely misinterpreted by jerks. Just this. Just don't call me Naomi anymore. Call me Mara. For the Lord has made me very bitter. Some translations translate that as, for the Lord has dealt bitterly with me. She says, I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has opposed me and the Almighty has afflicted me? Naomi changes her name. This is not at all insignificant. This is Naomi making the choice to say what has happened in her life is definitionally altering. So I'm not Naomi anymore. Naomi changing her name shows the lack of hope that in this moment she felt. That nothing would ever change the reality in which she found herself. That there was no plan or miracle or rescue or provision that would ever change the way that she felt or who she was at her very core now. She says, I am now Mara. Call me by my new name that reminds you of the bitterness that's in me. So many people have read this passage as if the Lord wishes you to read the book of Ruth and find in this moment the antagonist, and it's grumpy old bitter Naomi. Like, how dare you critique this woman for speaking to the Lord with such honesty and saying, I'm bitter. Now, Naomi's bitterness, even though she didn't cause it or deserve it, she certainly, in some ways, is leaning into it. You can tell in her words, right? Sometimes our bitterness starts to affect the way that we see things. And even our bad situation becomes to be rewritten as bad from the very beginning. Because what does Naomi say? She says, when I left this place, I was full. I mean, that couldn't be further from the truth. Like, when she left this place, she was starving, right? Naomi left the land because she believed that the presence and the provision of God, or at least her husband who was leading her, believed that that was over. That God didn't have it for him anymore, that he wasn't going to provide anymore. And so Naomi, who knew that her God was El Shaddai, right? He was the Almighty One, the providing God. That he provided, or he had promised faithfulness. And so what Naomi does in this moment is she cries out both to her God and to the people around her, saying there is an apparent contradiction between what your name is and what you're doing. And Naomi says, I'm not going to let that be the case for me anymore. I'll change my name because now I'm bitter. Bitter is the perfect word for how the pain of sin can affect us when it's not necessarily our own sin, but it's just the brokenness of the world falling upon us. Because bitterness, in its negative sense, is that taste that is so distinct that it overrides everything else, right? You can make a cup of coffee with great beans, great grinder, good water, and screw up the process, and all you will taste is bitterness. Don't put the right ingredients into chocolate. Don't balance it with enough sugar or cream, and eventually you won't enjoy it at all. It'll just sting and numb your tongue. Naomi says, I'm bitter. There's a taste in my mouth now that will prevent me from ever feeling the kindness of the Lord again. So don't call me that. She lets this start to color the way she sees even the story leading up to this point, saying, I went away full, I had plenty, and God brought me back this way, brought me back empty. So don't call me that anymore. In your moment of greatest despair, you have the freedom in relationship to cry out to God and to say, I need you to reconcile who you are with what I see right now. This is what Naomi's doing. She's saying, you've called me Naomi, and yet I am Mara, I am bitter. You've said you're El Shaddai, and I am alone and empty. How does the narrator answer or point us to the solution to Naomi's problem? Here's verse 22. It says this. So Naomi came back from the territory of Moab with her daughter-in-law Ruth and the Moabites. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. This is the foreshadowing of the entirety of the rest of the book found in verse 22. Naomi says, I'm alone. Naomi says, I'm completely empty. And what the book of Ruth honestly wants you to do is just have the sermon end right here. hopeless, empty, with only that one phrase. What time is it now? It's the time of the harvest. Where Naomi sees the work of God in this moment as the Almighty who has done this to her. He has afflicted her. He has brought this upon her. Instead, God, in reality, is working behind the scenes. But it's going to take weeks and months for Naomi to see that. Naomi and Elimelech and their sons fled the land because of famine, because there was no food, because nothing would grow. After they fled the land, they saw great devastation, and Naomi now says, I am Mara, I am bitter, because nothing will ever change what has happened to me. God has afflicted me. I went away with everything I needed, and I've come home with nothing. And so the author of this book just writes those simple words, that when they came home, it was the beginning of the harvest. That means things were starting to grow again. If you're in a season right now where you feel like God has just left you empty and alone, sometimes it can feel like there are zero actions that you can take. And I'm going to be honest with you, you're right. Like, losing your husband and your two sons in the span of a few years, now with this woman who's just really another mouth to feed, who has followed you back. Like, this girl's probably 15, right? Annoying, okay? Like, she's like, can we get Starbucks? She's like, no! Your husband, we have no money on the Starbucks card. I'm letting you ride the camel. Like, in this season where she felt nothing but alone and empty, the text says the harvest was starting. Sometimes the only action you can take in a season of great despair, grief, and pain is to try and get yourself, even if you don't know why, to be near to the presence of God again. How? Two things. One, I think you can come near to God in prayer. And I think that prayer can be imperfect and probably a little bit sharp. This is Naomi's action, right? Naomi is praying, I think, when she cries out in this way and says her name's changing. She is speaking to God with so much honesty that you don't even clock it as a prayer. Because you've been taught when you come before God in a moment, you better couch it in prettiness or he might do more to you. Because that's probably why you did in the first place. You didn't pray enough, right? No. Naomi says you can come before God, a God who has bound himself to you, who has called himself your provider, God, your El Shaddai. You can come before that God and say, hey, it doesn't feel like you are who you said you are. I need you to show me. That's one way you can step near the presence of God, is speak to him, even if it's with difficult honesty. The second, go where God has told you to be with the people of God. In a season of pain, in a season where you are worried to come here to this place, where you are worried to go to your city group, where you're worried to reach out digitally, where you're worried to make a post on our prayer request page, on our Discord, because you just don't really want people to pray for you because them praying for you is a reminder of how much God hasn't done for you. Don't resist being near. Come near the people of God because that is a part of the way that God reveals that he's there. It's perhaps part of the way that God is going to provide for you is that you're just going to be in the place where he wanted you to be and be associated by blessing. Maybe God is not going to fix your pain this side of heaven, not heal it, not take it away. But maybe he is going to provide for you alongside it. And maybe even if there is a tinge of bitterness for the rest of your life when you taste anything sweet, that does not mean that the God who, yes, did allow some bitterness to come in might not offer you sweetness again, in which you might somehow and impossibly find some balance. Sweetness and bitterness can exist side by side. It may be better if they did not. But do not, like Naomi, resign yourself to think that the way that it is the way that it will always be. Do not measure the care of God by what you have in this moment or what you see with your eyes. Do not assign value to your life or God's covenant by whether or not you feel or see his presence in what's in front of you today. Instead, trust that he is faithful to his word. And that in the moment where you feel like you've come home empty and alone, that he says, actually, the harvest is just beginning. There's hope on the horizon, both for what they need and for what they will learn to know. Just pray with me. Lord, in our midst, there are more than a handful of us who in our own way right now feel empty and alone. God, we need your help because sometimes when we're alone, something in us resists drawing near to you. Sometimes, Lord, when we of our own accord have walked away from you, Lord, whether that's in our heart and our attitude, or physically we've left the place that you've told us to be. We believe, Lord, that even if we go back, you still won't be there. God, help us to realize that even when we walk from the place that you've told us to be, that we haven't left where you are, because you are everywhere. God, thank you for reminding us, Lord, that your sweetness is so sweet that it can overwhelm the bitterness, the taste of the brokenness of this world, so that we can taste your sweetness, Lord, again. So we can remember your presence again, so we can perceive something outside of this pain. Lord, for those of us today who feel alone and empty, Lord, would you invite us to come home? And Lord, even though in this moment we may still be in grief, we may still be starving, Lord, help us to see that the harvest, in fact, has begun. The help is on the way. And that our hunger in the house of bread, in the presence of God, with the people of God, will not persist. In Jesus, whom we draw close to, we pray.